大家好，我是 Jenny， 欢迎来到沉思者 J。 有一个人，他是清末民初最耀眼的艺术全才，他写诗填词，他演话剧，他画油画，他作曲填词，他精通篆刻书法，他是中国第一个把西方旋律带进课堂的老师，他写出了那首让中国人唱了100年的送别。长亭外，古道边，芳草碧连天。这首歌的作者叫做李叔同。39岁那年，他把这一切全部放下了，剃度出家，法号弘一，从此一件衲衣，一双草鞋，一钵清水，走完了后半生的路。他的老学生丰子愷说过一句话，他说老师的人生可以分成3层楼，第一层是物质生活，第2层是精神艺术，第3层是灵魂宗教。大多数人住在1楼就住一辈子，少数人爬到了2楼，而李叔同爬到了3楼，然后把梯子也收走了。今天的故事就从这位3楼的住客说起。李叔同生于1880年，出生地是天津。他的父亲李世珍是一位成功的商人，同时也是一位虔诚的佛教居士。父亲在李叔同5岁的时候就去世了。这个早年的失去在他心里埋下了一颗种子，一颗对于生死的疑问种子。父亲去世时留下的场景让人难忘。当时有一位高僧为父亲诵经超度，那庄严的法器声，那飘绕的香烟，那沉默中透出的神圣感，全都深深印在了小书童的记忆里。母亲王氏是父亲的小妾，在那个讲究嫡庶之分的年代，母子2人的地位并不算高，但母亲非常疼爱这个孩子，把一切心血都倾注在他身上。他省吃俭用，他一个字一个字地教他读书，他用整个生命为这个儿子点起一盏灯。李叔同从小就展现出过人的天赋，他4岁开始读4书5经，少年时代已经能诗能词。13岁那年，他写出一句诗：人生犹如西山日，富贵终如草上霜。同辈的孩子还在玩耍的年纪，他已经在思考富贵与消逝了。16岁写出的诗句被前辈文人称赞为才气逼人，他在天津的文化圈里很快就出了名，有人说他是难得一见的神童。20岁那年，李叔同带着母亲南下上海，那时候的上海是全中国最洋气最繁华的城市。西风东渐，新思潮澎湃而来，李叔同一头栽进了这个新世界。他加入了城南文社，开始结识各路文人才俊。他填的词在上海文坛流传，大家都知道有一个叫李叔同的年轻人，写的一手好词，唱的也风流倜傥。那时候他还留着长辫，穿着长袍马褂，却已经在写非常现代的东西了。他在上海的生活是精彩的，他办过文艺期刊，他组织文学雅集，他写的诗词在圈子里广为流传。有朋友说他是天生的艺术家，无论接触什么都能很快找到其中的美。那个时代正是中国最动荡的年代，庚子事变，8国联军进北京，旧秩序崩塌，新世界尚未成型。李叔同在这个夹缝里开始思考，自己的人生应该往哪里走。1905年，他的母亲去世了，这个他在世上最亲近的人的离去让他悲痛欲绝。办完母亲的丧事之后，他做了一个决定，東と日本，去寻找一个全新的自己。在日本的6年，是李叔同人生中最灼热最燃烧的阶段。他进入东京美术学校学习油画，师从著名画家黑田清辉，这是他第一次系统学习西方绘画技术和理论。他全力以赴，他的油画作品后来在毕业展览上获得高度评价。那个时代能以中国人的身份在日本正规美术学院留下这样的成绩，是非常不容易的事情。但他不只是画画，他同时学习钢琴和小提琴，他学习作曲理论和西方和声。他的学习方式非常特别，不是走马看花，不是浅尝即止，他对每一件事都要深入进去，他要理解它的根本，他要把它变成自己的一部分。他还研究话剧这种西方的表演艺术，在日本成立了中国第一个话剧社团，叫做春柳社。他们演出的改编自小仲马小说的话剧， 被视为中国话剧艺术的起点之一。李叔同在那场演出里扮演女主角，她为了演好这个角色，认真研究女性的走路方式和神态，认真研究服装和化妆。那张她扮演女主角的照片流传至今，精致婉丽，几乎看不出是男性。她就是这样一个人，做什么事情都要做到极致。在日本期间，她还做了一件意义深远的事，她创办了中国最早介绍西方旋律的期刊，向国内的读者普及全新的乐理概念。她在日本还娶了一位日本妻子福姬，她温柔善良，后来跟着她回到了中国。1910年，李叔同学成归国，回到上海之后，她开始在学校任教，先是在上海城东女学，后来转到浙江省立第一师范学校，就是今天的杭州。这是他教书生涯最重要的舞台。他在那里教图画，教乐歌，用最认真最严格的方式教学生。他把西方的旋律理论引进课堂，教学生唱歌，教学生乐理，教学生用音符表达情感。这在当时的中国是非常新鲜的事情。他的课堂有一种独特的气氛，不是靠严厉维持的秩序，而是靠真正的认真感染出来的安静。他的每一堂课都准备得非常充分，他的每一张示范作品都一丝不苟。学生说跟着李老师学，你不可能不认真，因为当你看见一个人那样全力以赴地对待一件事，你自然而然也想那样做。他的学生里有一个叫丰子愷的年轻人，后来成为著名的漫画家和散文家，还有一个叫刘直平的学生，后来成为重要的旋律教育家。这些学生后来都说，李叔同老师是他们这辈子见过最认真的老师。他上课从来不迟到，他批改作业一丝不苟，学生迟到了他不骂人，他只是安静地等着，用那种沉静的眼神看着你，让你自己羞愧。丰子愷后来说，走进李老师的课堂就像走进了一个干净的地方，你连呼吸都想慢下来。就是在这段教书的岁月里，他写出了那首送别。那年是1915年左右，他根据美国歌手奥德威的旋律填上了自己的中文歌词。长亭外，古道边，芳草碧连天，晚风拂柳笛声残。夕阳山外山，天之涯，地之角，知交半零落。一壶浊酒尽余欢，今宵别梦寒。这首歌写的是离别，但不只是人与人之间的离别。后来我们知道，那也许是他写给自己艺术人生的告别。他在人生最风光的时候，已经开始有了出离的念头。他读佛书，他与僧人交往，他开始感受到世俗的一切都是无常的，所有的美丽都会消逝，所有的欢乐都会凋零。他的内心深处有一个声音在问他，这一切之后还有什么？他开始尝试斋戒，尝试静坐，尝试在喧嚣的生活中找到一个安静的核心。同事和朋友们看着他的变化，有人理解，有人不理解，有人觉得可惜。这样一个才气纵横的人，难道真的要把自己的人生交给青灯古佛？1916年，李叔同到虎跑寺去断食修行，这是他走向出家的重要一步。他在虎跑寺住了3周，那段时间他几乎不吃东西，只喝水。在极度清空的状态里，他感受到了前所未有的清明。他说那种感觉像是把一杯浑浊的水静置之后，杂质沉淀了，水慢慢变清了，你才看见水本来的样子。出来之后，他的眼神变了，同事和学生都说他好像不一样了，不是消沉了，而是更安静了，更坚定了。1917年，他正式皈依佛门，成为在家居士。他开始吃素，开始持戒，开始一点一点地把世俗的牵绊放下。1918年农历正月15，他在杭州灵隐寺正式剃度出家，法号衍音，别号弘一。他那一年39岁，正是一个艺术家最成熟的年纪，正是一个男人最意气风发的时候。他的日本妻子福姬听说了这个消息，专程从上海赶到杭州来找他。他问他，书童，你真的要走吗？他平静地回答说，请你把我当成死了吧。这句话让很多人心疼了100年。有人说他太冷酷， 有人说他太自私，但也有人说那也许是他能给他的最后的温柔，让他死心，让他可以重新开始。福基后来回到了日本，据说他在离开之前在船头望着杭州的方向站了很久，不知道他那时候在想什么，但那个身影让人难忘，让我们看见了每一个伟大的选择背后，都有另一个人默默承受着他的重量。出家之后的弘一法师选择了南山律宗作为他的修行道路。律宗是佛教里最严格的宗派之一，注重持戒，注重每一个行为的清净。律宗的修行要求出家人遵守大量细致的戒律，从怎么走路，到怎么喝水，到怎么与人说话，每一个细节都有规范。有人说律宗是最难修的宗派，因为要求的是全天候的正念，是把觉知贯穿在生活的每一个瞬间。弘一法师把这个要求发挥到了极致。他走路的时候看着地面怕踩死蚂蚁，他喝水之前先看看杯子里有没有小虫，有的话就放到外面去。有一次，一位访客拿了一把椅子要坐下，弘一法师请他先轻轻提起椅子看看，因为椅子脚下面可能有小虫趴着。那个访客后来说，那一刻他突然明白了什么叫做慈悲，不是说出来的，是活出来的。他的内衣破了又补，补了又破。有人问他要不要换一件新的，他说能穿就好，他不需要美丽了。他把一生对于美的追求全部转化成了对于清净的向往。那件白内衣上面有多少个补丁，就是他对这个世界多少份温柔的记录。弘一法师在闽南一带弘扬律宗，走遍厦门、泉州、漳州，他的足迹遍及福建各地。他住在简陋的小屋里，他吃的是最简单的食物，他每天起得很早，在晨光里诵经礼佛。他的生活里没有多余的东西，却因此有了一种极致的丰盛。他那个时代的很多名僧都把佛法说得玄之又玄，但弘一法师不一样，他说的是最朴实的道理。他说学佛不是别的，就是认认真真的过好每一天，就是在每一个当下都不要马虎。他在闽南讲佛法的时候，每次开讲之前都要把场地打扫干净，把蒲团摆放整齐。他说道场就是心的镜子，道场干不干净就是你的心清不清净。很多人慕名而来听他说法，有读书人，有商人，有农民，有老人，有孩子。他对每个人都一样的认真，一样的温柔。有人问他佛法的精髓是什么，他说就是3个字，不伤害，不伤害任何一个生命，不伤害任何一颗心。就这样，弘一法师出家后仍然写书法，但他的书法风格彻底变了。出家前的李叔同书法里有锋芒，有气势，有一种想要让人看见的力量。那是一个艺术家的字，写的时候心里装着自己很被欣赏的期待。出家后的弘一法师书法里只剩下平静，那种字帖看起来就像一个人走路的姿态，不急不徐，不争不抢，每一个字都安安静静地站在那里。有人说他晚年的书法已经达到了无我的境界。一般的书法家是用笔在说话，而弘一法师是用整个生命在写字。他的书法作品流传至今，每一幅都像是一道寄语，让看的人静下来。他送给丰子愷的一幅字写的是丰子愷把那幅字挂在书房的正中央，挂了一辈子。他说每当心里浮躁了，看见那4个字就安静了，因为那不只是4个字，那是一个人真实活过的见证。弘一法师在闽南弘法期间写过一封信给老学生刘直平，信上说了一段非常有名的话。他说做人要在有事时能承担，得意时能退让，失意时能自强。这4句话听起来简单，但能做到的人不多。他自己就是这4句话最好的示范。在人生最得意的时候，他选择退让；在世人都不理解的眼光中，他选择自强。他从来不抱怨别人的不理解，他从来不为自己的选择辩护，他只是静静地活着，静静地示范。他的学生们后来成为了各自领域的大师。丰子愷的漫画温柔而深刻，刘直平的旋律教育影响了一代人。 他们都说老师给我们最大的礼物不是技术，是态度，是那种把每一件事都当成最重要的事来对待的态度。1937年抗日战争爆发，那是中国最黑暗的年代之一。弘一法师在那段时间写下了一句话：念佛不忘救国，救国必须念佛。有人说他这句话很奇怪，出家人为什么要讲救国？他说出家不是逃离，出家是更深的进入。他的心从来没有离开过这片土地，他为战争中流离失所的人们祈祷，他继续在庙宇里写字讲法，继续用他能做到的方式抚慰那个动荡时代里破碎的人心。晚年的弘一法师体力渐渐衰退，但他的精神依然清明。他继续写书法，继续整理律宗的典籍，继续接待来访的僧俗信众。有人问他老了以后最希望的是什么，他说希望自己死的时候身边的人不要哭，让他安安静静地走。他说人的来去本来就是自然的事情，哭是多余的。1942年，弘一法师在福建泉州圆寂，他63岁，临终前他留下了最后的书法，4个字：悲心交集。有人问这4个字是什么意思，有人说是悲哀与欢喜交织在一起，有人说是对人生苦乐的最终体悟，也有人说那是一个已经看透了一切的人在告别这个世界时留下的最后的微笑。他还留下了一个遗嘱，要求在装殓的时候在棺材的4个脚下各放一个装水的碗，这样蚂蚁就不会爬进来，就不会被关在棺材里面。直到最后一刻他还在想着那些最微小的生命，那个细节让很多人看了落泪，不是因为悲伤，是因为震撼。什么叫做慈悲？就是这样，连临终都不忘记，连最后的心思都还在那些最小的存在上面。丰子愷后来写了一篇文章，说他的老师是他这辈子见过的最像人应该有的样子的人。不是说李叔同没有缺点，而是说他做了一件很少人能做到的事情。他忠实于自己内心的呼唤，他在每一个人生的阶段都把那个阶段活到了最饱满的状态。做文人的时候是最好的文人，做艺术家的时候是最好的艺术家，做老师的时候是最好的老师，做僧人的时候是最好的僧人。他的一生不是一条直线，而是一个螺旋，不断向上，不断舍弃，不断靠近那个他心中最真实的自己。很多人问这样值得吗？把那么多的才华都放下了，把那么多的温柔都放下了，把那个爱他的日本女人也放下了，值得吗？我觉得这个问题问错了，不是值不值得的问题，是他看见了什么的问题。他看见了某种我们大多数人没有看见的东西，他选择了追随那个东西，这就是他的人生，没有什么可以遗憾的。送别这首歌到今天还有很多人在唱，每次听到那个旋律我都觉得时间慢了下来。长亭外，古道边，我们每个人都有过那样的时刻，站在一个路口，看着前方不知道通向哪里的路，心里有一种说不清楚的感受，是不舍，是期待，是对未知的恐惧，也是对新开始的渴望。李叔同用他的一生告诉我们，美丽可以有很多种形式，可以是一首诗，可以是一幅画，可以是一个音符，也可以是一件破了又补的内衣，可以是走路时低头看地的那个姿势，可以是在生命的最后留下悲心交集4个字。所谓的放下不是什么都不在乎，而是把那份在乎转化成了更深更广的东西。华之春满，天心月圆，那是弘一法师自己说的。花开得满满的，月亮圆圆地挂在天上，那就是他所追求的境界，不是超脱了人间，而是把人间看得更清楚了，更深情了。谢谢你今天听完这个故事，如果你喜欢这一集请记得按赞和订阅，让更多人听见这些美丽的生命故事。我们下次见咯。 Hello everyone, I am Jenny. Welcome to Thinker J. There was a man. He was the most brilliantly gifted artistic polymath of late Qing and early Republican China. He wrote classical poetry and song lyrics. He performed in stage plays. He painted in oils. He composed melodies and filled them with words. He mastered seal carving and calligraphy. He was the first person in China to bring Western music formally into a classroom. And he wrote a farewell song that Chinese people have been singing for more than 100 years. The song was called Farewell. Its opening line spoke of a pavilion by a long ancient road, where wild grass stretched green all the way to the sky. The man who wrote those words was named Li Shudong. At the age of 39, at the very height of his powers, he put all of it down. He shaved his head and became a Buddhist monk. His Dharma name was Hongyi. From that day forward, one patched robe, one pair of straw sandals, one bowl of clean water. That was how he walked through the rest of his life. His most celebrated student, the artist and essayist豐子愷, once described his teacher with an unforgettable image. He said that human life is like a building with 3 floors. The first floor is the life of material comfort and survival. The second floor is the life of art and the spirit. The third floor is the life of the soul and religious devotion. Most people spend their entire lives on the first floor and never climb higher. A rare few make it to the second. But Li Shudong climbed all the way to the 3rd floor. And then he pulled the ladder up behind him. This is the story of that man. Li Shudong was born in 1880 in the northern port city of Tianjin. His father, Li Shizhen, was a successful merchant who had built a prosperous business. At the same time, his father was a devout lay Buddhist, a man who gave generously to temples and supported monks throughout the region. When Li Shudong was only 5 years old, his father passed away. That early loss planted something deep in his heart, a persistent and restless question about life and death and the meaning of existence. The memory of the funeral ceremonies stayed with him for decades. A venerable monk had come to perform the rites of passage for his father. The solemn sounds of the ceremonial instruments, the drifting fragrance of incense, the quality of sacred silence that filled the room. All of these images settled into the memory of that small child and never fully left. His mother, Lady Wang, was his father's concubine. In the rigid social hierarchy of that era, the position of a concubine and her son was not highly regarded, even within the family household. But his mother poured every ounce of her love, energy, and ambition into raising this one son. She taught him to read, character by character. She found teachers for him when he was ready to learn more than she could offer. She gave him, through her own sacrifice and devotion, the foundation for everything that came after. From his earliest years, Li Shudong showed extraordinary natural gifts. He began reading the classical Confucian texts at the age of 4. By his teenage years, he was already composing poetry and classical lyrics that caught the attention of scholars far older than himself. At 13, he wrote a poem that contained the lines, "Human life is like the sun descending behind the western hills, wealth and honor are as frost on the tips of grass." While other boys his age were playing in the streets, this child was already meditating on impermanence and the passing of worldly things. By 16, the poems he produced were being praised by senior literary figures as sparkling with rare genius. He became known throughout the cultural circles of Tianjin. People called him a prodigy unlike any they had seen. At 20, Li Shudong brought his mother south to Shanghai. Shanghai in those years was the most cosmopolitan and vibrant city in all of China. Western ideas, new philosophies, modern technology, and foreign fashions were flooding in from every direction. The old world was cracking open at its foundations. Li Shudong threw himself into this new world with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting for exactly this. He joined a literary society called Chengnan Wensha and began meeting writers, artists, and thinkers from every background. His classical lyrics began circulating through the Shanghai literary world. Everyone knew there was a young man named Li Shudong who wrote beautifully and carried himself with elegant ease. He still wore his traditional long gown and kept the braided queue required of all men under the Qing dynasty. But his mind was already reaching far beyond the traditions he had been born into. He founded literary journals. He organized gatherings of writers and artists. He experimented with new forms of expression, blending the classical sensibility he had absorbed since childhood with the modern energy that crackled through Shanghai like electricity. Those were also the most turbulent years in recent Chinese history. The Boxer Uprising shook the country, the armies of 8 foreign nations marched into Beijing, the old imperial order was visibly coming apart. Li Shudong navigated these years of upheaval by choosing to leave. In 1905, his mother passed away. The death of the person who had been closest to him in all the world broke something open inside him. After completing her funeral rites, he made a decisive choice. He would cross the sea to Japan. He would go to find an entirely new version of himself. The 6 years Li Shudong spent in Japan were the most intense and blazing period of his life. He enrolled in the Tokyo Fine Arts School to study Western oil painting under the celebrated painter Kuroda Seki. This was the first time he had studied the techniques, traditions, and philosophy of Western visual art in a rigorous and systematic way. He dedicated himself completely. His oil paintings later received high praise at graduation exhibitions, and his work was recognized as genuinely accomplished by Japanese standards. For a Chinese student to achieve this at a respected Japanese institution in the early 20th century was remarkable. But he was never content to master only one thing. Simultaneously with his painting studies, he was learning piano and violin. He was studying music composition theory and understanding how Western harmony and structure worked. He was also throwing himself into the study of theater, an art form that barely existed yet in China. In Tokyo, he helped found the very first Chinese Drama Society, an organization called the Spring Willow Society. One of their most celebrated productions was a stage adaptation based on the novel by Alexander Dumas the Younger about a woman named Marguerite. Li Shudong played the female lead in that production. To prepare for the role, he studied in meticulous detail how women moved, how they held themselves, how they applied makeup and arranged their clothing. A photograph of him in that costume and character has survived to this day. The image is so refined and delicate, the presence so completely convincing, that it is almost impossible to believe the figure portrayed is a man. This quality of absolute commitment was the very center of who he was. Whatever he undertook, he pursued without reservation to its most distant limit. During his years in Japan, he also founded what is believed to have been among the first Chinese publications devoted to Western music education, introducing musical theory and notation to readers back home. He also married a Japanese woman during this period, a gentle and devoted woman named Fuki. She would later follow him back to China when his studies were complete. In 1910, Li Shudong completed his studies and returned home. Back in Shanghai, he began teaching, first at a girls' school and then, in what would become the most important chapter of his teaching career, at the First Provincial Normal School of Zhejiang Province in the beautiful lakeside city of Hangzhou. He taught drawing. He taught music. He taught with a seriousness and a precision that his students had never encountered in a classroom before. He introduced Western music theory into Chinese education, teaching students how to read notation, how to understand harmony, how to use sound to express what words cannot say. This was genuinely new in China at the time. His classroom had a distinctive and powerful atmosphere. It was not maintained by strictness or punishment. It arose from a quality of total presence that he brought to every moment of every class. He never arrived late. He prepared every lesson as thoroughly as if he were presenting it to a gathering of experts. He marked every piece of student work with complete and careful attention. When a student arrived late, he did not scold or lecture. He simply waited in silence. He looked at the student with calm, still eyes. And the student felt, in that silence, the weight of their own carelessness more powerfully than any words of reproach could have conveyed. Among his students during these years was a young man named豐子愷, who would go on to become one of China's most beloved artists and writers. Another student, Liu Zhiping, would become a foundational figure in Chinese music education. Both of them spent the rest of their long lives writing about their teacher with reverence and love. They said that what Li Shudong gave them was not primarily technical skill. It was something about the way he approached everything he did. A quality of complete seriousness, of genuine respect for the work itself.豐子愷wrote that entering his teacher's classroom was like stepping into a place where only things that truly mattered were allowed to exist. Even the air felt different. It was during these years of teaching in Hangzhou that he wrote the song called Farewell. The year was approximately 1915. He took the melody of an American parlor song composed by John Pond Ordway and fitted it with Chinese lyrics of his own creation. Outside the pavilion, by the ancient road, green grass stretches all the way to the horizon. The evening wind stirs the willow trees, a distant flute sounds and fades, the sun sets behind mountain after mountain. At the ends of the earth, old friends have scattered. A jug of cloudy wine holds what little joy remains. Tonight in this dream of farewell, the cold settles in. The song was ostensibly about the parting of friends. But it was also something more than that. Looking back from the distance of a century, we understand that it may have been his farewell to his own life as an artist, a scholar, a man of the world. Because even in those years of apparent flourishing, he had already begun to feel the pull of something beyond. He was reading Buddhist texts with increasing intensity. He was spending time with monks and contemplatives. He was beginning to feel in his bones that everything in the world of form and sensation was impermanent. All beauty fades. All joy eventually passes. A voice somewhere deep inside him was asking a question that his art could not answer. After all of this, what is left? He began fasting. He began sitting in silence for long periods each day. He began the slow internal process of turning away from the world he had mastered and toward something he could not yet name. Colleagues and friends who knew him could see the change. Some understood. Some did not. Some felt a kind of grief, watching this man of such extraordinary gifts begin to turn away from everything he had built. In 1916, Li Shudong went to a temple called Hujin-si near the West Lake in Hangzhou to practice a period of extended fasting meditation. This journey was an important step on his way toward formal renunciation. He spent 3 weeks at the temple, eating almost nothing, drinking only water. In the extreme emptiness of that state, stripped of every comfort and distraction, he experienced a quality of clarity that was entirely new to him. He described it afterward as being like a glass of muddy water that has been left to stand undisturbed. The sediment settles. The water grows still. And then you see the water as it actually is. When he came out, those who knew him noticed the change. His colleagues and his students said he seemed different. Not diminished, not sad, but quieter. More settled. As if a question that had been restless inside him had found its answer. In 1917 he formally took refuge in the Three Jewels and became a lay Buddhist. He began observing a strictly vegetarian diet. He began keeping the precepts of lay Buddhist practice. He began, one attachment at a time, the process of releasing his hold on the world he had lived in. Then in 1918, on the 15th day of the first lunar month, he formally took his monastic vows at Lingyin Temple in Hangzhou, one of the great ancient temples of China. He was 39 years old. The most mature and productive time in an artist's life. The prime of a man's vitality and power. His Japanese wife Fuki heard the news and traveled immediately from Shanghai to Hangzhou to find him. She asked him directly, clearly, whether this was truly final. Whether he was truly going to leave everything they had shared. He replied with a voice that his witnesses later described as perfectly calm. He said, "Please think of me as already dead." Those words have moved people and troubled people for more than 100 years. Some say he was cold. Some say he was selfish and irresponsible. Others say that perhaps those words were the most compassionate thing he could offer her. That by being so absolute, he freed her from uncertainty, freed her to stop waiting, freed her to begin a new life. Fuki returned to Japan. Those who were present said that before she left, she stood at the bow of the boat for a long time, looking back in the direction of Hangzhou. No one recorded what she was thinking in that moment. But the image itself tells us something important. Every great choice, every genuine transformation, casts a shadow that falls on someone else. And sometimes the person standing in that shadow has no choice but to find their own way through it. After taking his vows, Master Hongyi chose the Nanshan Vinaya school of Buddhism as his path of practice and study. The Vinaya school is one of the most demanding traditions within all of Buddhism. Its central concern is the complete and meticulous observance of the monastic code of conduct, which regulates not only the major decisions of life but the finest details of daily behavior. How to walk. How to eat. How to speak. How to use space and time and the objects around you. Every moment of the day governed by careful, conscious attention. Some Buddhist scholars describe the Vinaya school as the most difficult of all Buddhist paths precisely because it demands not occasional heroism but constant, unrelenting, moment-by-moment mindfulness. Master Hongyi brought this discipline to a level that astonished everyone who witnessed it. When he walked, he kept his gaze directed at the path in front of his feet, so as never to crush any tiny creature underfoot. Before drinking from a cup of water, he examined it carefully to make sure no small insects were inside. If he found any, he carried them to a safe place before drinking. On one occasion, a visitor picked up a wooden chair to set it down in a new position. Master Hongyi asked the visitor to first lift the chair gently and look beneath its legs. There might be an insect resting there, he explained, and it would be harmed when the chair came down. The visitor said that in that moment he understood what the word compassion actually meant. Not as a concept. As a practice. As a way of moving through the world. His robe was repaired and re-repaired, worn thin and mended again and again until each piece of fabric had been rebuilt from patches. When visitors asked whether he would like a new robe, he said that as long as it kept him warm and covered, it was entirely sufficient. He had left behind the kind of beauty the world could see and admire. He had transformed his lifelong pursuit of the beautiful into a pursuit of the pure and the simple. And perhaps, in the eyes of those who understood what they were looking at, his patched robe and his steady gaze and his careful steps were themselves a form of beauty more durable than anything he had ever painted or composed. Master Hongyi spent much of his later monastic life in the southern Fujian region, traveling between the cities of Xiamen, Quanzhou, and Zhangzhou, teaching, studying, and guiding others in the practice of the Vinaya. He lived in simple quarters, often a small room attached to a temple, with few possessions and no comforts beyond what was necessary. He woke early each morning to begin his devotional practice before the sun was fully up. He worked steadily through the day, reading, writing, and receiving those who came to ask questions or seek guidance. Many famous monks of that era spoke about the Dharma in elaborate philosophical language filled with allusions and metaphysical complexity. Master Hongyi was different. He spoke in the simplest possible terms. He said that Buddhist practice was not complicated. It came down to living each day with honesty and care, to being fully present in every moment, to not treating any single moment as less important than any other. He used to say that the way you sweep a floor is a form of practice. The way you pour a cup of tea is a form of practice. If you do those things with full attention and care, you are already on the path. Many people came from great distances to hear him speak. Scholars and merchants, farmers and officials, old men and young children. He gave the same attention and the same quality of presence to all of them. A student once asked him what the essence of Buddhism was, reduced to its absolute minimum. He thought for a moment and said, 3 words. Do not harm. Do not harm any living creature. Do not harm any human heart. That is the whole of it. Even after taking his vows, Master Hongyi continued to practice calligraphy. But his calligraphic style had undergone a transformation so complete that it was almost impossible to connect it to his earlier work. The calligraphy of Li Shudong the artist had been full of force and presence. There was ambition in it, the unmistakable energy of a man who knew his own gifts and wanted the world to see them. The calligraphy of Master Hongyi had something entirely different. What remained was pure stillness. His brushwork had the quality of a person walking without any particular destination, with no hurry and no agenda. Each character stood in its place quietly and completely. Nothing calling attention to itself. Nothing competing for admiration. Scholars who have studied his work say that his late calligraphy achieved what practitioners of the tradition call the state of no self. Where the ordinary calligrapher uses the brush as a vehicle for expressing personality and intention, Master Hongyi seemed to have stepped aside entirely. The brush moved. The characters appeared. But the sense of an ego performing for an audience had dissolved. He gave calligraphic pieces to students and friends throughout his later years. To Fengzikai he once gave a piece bearing the characters for Wild Crane in Open Sky, a traditional image of freedom and naturalness. Fengzikai hung that piece in the center of his study for the rest of his life. He said that whenever restlessness or anxiety rose in him, a single glance at those 4 characters settled it. Because behind those characters was a life that had actually been lived in accordance with them. The words had a particular kind of authority that only genuine living can provide. There is a story that circulated among those who knew Master Hongyi in his later years. A scholar came to visit him and found him sitting at his writing table, about to begin a piece of calligraphy. The scholar watched as Master Hongyi prepared his ink, smoothed the paper, and sat for a long moment in complete stillness before lifting his brush. The scholar asked him what he was doing in that moment of stillness. Master Hongyi replied that he was making sure his mind was ready before his hand moved. He said that a brushstroke cannot be taken back. So before every stroke, he gave himself a moment to be certain that the stroke arising from his brush was the stroke that was actually meant to be there. The scholar said he went home from that visit and thought about how differently he wrote his own letters and reports, always rushing, always moving without pausing to be sure. He said he began to understand, for the first time, what the word practice actually meant. Not the practice of a skill. The practice of a way of being. Another story involves a gift of food. A devotee who deeply admired Master Hongyi brought him a special preserved vegetable as an offering, something the devotee believed was a great delicacy. Master Hongyi accepted the gift graciously and ate it. Afterward, he said simply that it was very good. The devotee was pleased and later brought him a much more expensive and elaborately prepared preserved vegetable from a famous shop. Master Hongyi ate this one too. Afterward, he said that it was also very good. The devotee was confused. How could the plain cheap vegetable and the expensive fancy one taste equally good? Master Hongyi smiled and said that when you are truly hungry and truly present, every mouthful of food is perfect. When you have stopped comparing, stopped chasing the better experience, stopped craving more than what is in front of you, then every simple thing reveals its own fullness. This, he said, is what the precepts are actually for. They are not punishments or deprivations. They are tools for clearing away the noise so that you can hear the music that was always playing. In the letters he wrote to his former students during his monastic years, Master Hongyi often included passages of practical wisdom. In one letter to his student Liu Zhiping, he wrote that a person should be able to carry responsibility when there is work to be done, to maintain inner discipline when there is nothing pressing to do, to yield gracefully when things are going well, and to strengthen themselves quietly when they are in difficulty. These 4 capacities, he said, were the foundation of a decent life. They sound simple when stated this way, but they are extraordinarily difficult to actually embody. And Li Shutong himself was their best demonstration. When his artistic life was flourishing, he yielded. When the world did not understand his choice, he strengthened himself in silence. He never complained about being misunderstood. He never defended himself or sought to justify what he had done. He simply lived what he had chosen, with complete consistency and without any drama. His students went on to distinguished careers in the arts and education.丰zi Kai became one of the most beloved cultural figures in 20th century China. Liu Zhiping became a foundational influence on modern music education. Both of them wrote about their teacher throughout their lives with a reverence that only deepened as they grew older. They said that the most important thing he taught them was not a skill or a technique. It was the quality of attention he brought to everything he did. The refusal to treat any moment, any student, any piece of work as unworthy of his full presence. In 1937, war came to China on a devastating scale. Japanese forces launched a full invasion, beginning 8 years of destruction and suffering. Master Hongyi, already in his late 50s, was living in southern Fujian during those years. He wrote during that period the statement, "Recite the Buddha's name without forgetting the nation. To save the nation, recite the Buddha's name." Some people found this statement puzzling. Why would a monk speak of national salvation? He responded by saying that renouncing the world does not mean abandoning the world. Renunciation means entering more deeply into reality, not escaping from it. His heart had never left the suffering of the people around him. He continued his teaching and his practice through the war years. He prayed for those who had been displaced and killed. He used the resources available to him, the calligraphy pieces he distributed, the teaching he offered, the simple quality of his presence, to provide what comfort he could to people living through devastation. As he moved into his 60s, his physical strength gradually diminished. But those who visited him in those final years said that his mental clarity remained extraordinary. He continued to write. He continued to revise and clarify the texts he had spent decades preparing on the Vinaya tradition. He continued to receive visitors and answer questions with the same unhurried attentiveness he had shown throughout his monastic life. During those difficult years he also completed a comprehensive commentary on the core texts of the Vinaya school, a work of enormous scholarly value that monastics have studied in the decades since. He worked on this commentary with the same meticulous attention he had brought to every project throughout his life, checking sources, clarifying ambiguities, ensuring that the precision of the teaching would survive his own passing. Some of the monks who assisted him in this work said it was remarkable to watch. Here was a man whose body was failing, who coughed through the cold mornings and tired easily in the afternoons. And yet when he sat at his writing table, the quality of his attention was undiminished. It was as if the energy that had once gone into painting, into theater, into teaching, into the whole vast enterprise of his artistic life, had been gathered and concentrated into this one remaining work. All of it focused now on this last transmission, this effort to pass forward with complete faithfulness the discipline he had spent a lifetime learning. When people asked what he hoped for in his final years, he said he hoped to go quietly. He hoped that the people around him would not weep. He said that the coming and going of living beings was the most natural thing in the world. Grief was understandable, but it was unnecessary. He had prepared for this moment for a very long time. In 1942, Master Hongyi passed away in the city of Quanzhou in Fujian province. He was 63 years old. Before he died, he completed one final piece of calligraphy. For characters expressing the feeling of sorrow and joy flowing together. People have spent decades reflecting on the meaning of those 4 characters. Some understand them as describing the mingling of grief at leaving the world and gratitude for having been in it. Some understand them as his final understanding of the inseparability of suffering and beauty in human experience. Others say that those 4 characters were the last smile of a man who had finally seen through everything, offering the world a quiet and lasting farewell. He also left behind a written instruction regarding the preparation of his body after death. He asked that when he was placed in his coffin, a small bowl of water should be set beneath each of the 4 corners. This would prevent any ants resting on the ground from crawling into the coffin and being sealed inside. Even at the very threshold of death, his attention was on the smallest and most vulnerable of living things. When people read about this detail, many of them find that something inside them goes very still. It is not sadness exactly. It is more like being struck by the completeness of something. Here was a man who had given decades of his life to the practice of not causing harm. And at the last moment, with his last instruction, he was still practicing, still attending, still caring for the creatures no one else thought to protect.丰zi Kai wrote an essay about his teacher many years after Master Hong Yi's death. He said that his teacher was the person in his life who came closest to what a human being truly ought to be. This was not a claim that Li Shudong had been without faults or contradictions. What Feng Zikai meant was something more precise. He meant that Li Shudong had done something very few people managed to accomplish. He had lived in faithful, consistent response to the deepest and most insistent calls of his own inner life. He had not spent his years performing a version of himself for others. He had spent them actually following where his deepest nature led. At every stage of that life, he had given the stage everything it deserved. When he was a man of letters, he was among the finest men of letters of his generation. When he was an artist, he was among the most accomplished artists. When he was a teacher, he was the kind of teacher that students remember not just for decades but for their entire lives. When he was a monk, he became one of the most respected and genuinely practiced monastics of his era. His life was not a straight line moving in one direction. It was a spiral, always rising, always releasing what had been mastered, always moving closer to the most essential and most honest version of itself. Many people ask, was it worth it? He let go of so much. His art, his fame, his teaching career, the woman who loved him, the comfortable life he could have lived. Was it worth it? I think that question misses the point. It was not a transaction. He did not trade one thing for another and calculate the gain. He saw something that most of us do not see. Something that called to him from a depth he could not ignore. And he followed it. That was his life. There is nothing to regret about it. The song called Farewell is still sung today. Parents teach it to children. School choirs perform it at graduations and send-offs. The melody is more than 100 years old now, and the words are as clear and as true as the day they were written. Every time I hear it, I feel time slow down. Outside the pavilion, by the ancient road. All of us have known a moment like that. Standing at a threshold, looking down a path whose destination we cannot yet see. Feeling something that does not have a simple name. It is the ache of leaving behind something familiar and beloved. And at the same time, the quiet stir of something beginning. Li Shudong used his whole life to show us that beauty is not a single thing. It is not confined to any one form or any one tradition. It can live in a poem, in a painting, in a perfectly placed musical phrase. But it can also live in a robe patched beyond counting, in the gesture of lowering your eyes as you walk so as not to crush the smallest living thing, in 4 final brushstrokes on paper before you go. What we call letting go is not the absence of caring. It is the transformation of caring into something wider and deeper than any single attachment can hold. The flowering branches full to overflowing, the moon in the sky perfectly round. That was the state he spent his whole life approaching. Not a transcendence of the human world, not an escape from it. But a way of seeing it so clearly and loving it so completely that nothing in it can diminish you anymore. Thank you for spending this time with me today. If you found this episode meaningful, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more stories like this one to more people who are looking for them. See you next time.